Chapter 2 of Book 6 of Les Misérables, Volume 4, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by May Lowe. Les Misérables, Volume 4, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 6. Little Gavroche. Chapter 2, in which little Gavroche extracts profit from Napoleon the Great. Spring in Paris is often traversed by harsh and piercing breezes, which do not precisely chill, but freeze one. These north winds, which sadden the most beautiful days, produce exactly the effect of those puffs of cold air which enter a warm room through the cracks of a badly fitting door or window. It seems as though the gloomy door of winter had remained ajar, and as though the wind were pouring through it. In the spring of 1832, the epoch when the first great epidemic of this century broke out in Europe, these north gales were more harsh and piercing than ever. It was a door even more glacial than that of winter which was ajar. It was the door of the sepulchre. In these winds one felt the breath of the cholera. From a meteorological point of view, these cold winds possessed this peculiarity, that they did not preclude a strong electric tension. Frequent storms, accompanied by thunder and lightning, burst forth at this epoch. One evening, when these gales were blowing rudely, to such a degree that January seemed to have returned, and that the bourgeois had resumed their cloaks, little Gavroche, who was always shivering gaily under his rags, was standing as though in ecstasy before a wig-maker's shop in the vicinity of the Orme Saint Gervais. He was adorned with a woman's woollen shawl, picked up no one knows where, and which he had converted into a neck comforter. Little Gavroche appeared to be engaged in intent admiration of a wax bride, in a low-necked dress, and crowned with orange flowers, who was revolving in the window, and displaying her smile to passers-by, between two argand lamps. But in reality he was taking an observation of the shop, in order to discover whether he could not prig from the shop front a cake of soap, which he would then proceed to sell for a sou to a hairdresser in the suburbs. He had often managed to breakfast off of such a roll. He called his species of work, for which he possessed special aptitude, shaving barbers. While contemplating the bride and eyeing the cake of soap, he muttered between his teeth, "Tuesday. It was not Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? Perhaps it was Tuesday. Yes, it was Tuesday." No one has ever discovered to what this monologue referred. Yes, perchance, this monologue had some connection with the last occasion on which he had dined, 3 days before, for it was now Friday. The barber in his shop, which was warmed by a good stove, was shaving a customer and casting a glance from time to time at the enemy, that freezing and impudent street urchin, both of whose hands were in his pockets, but whose mind was evidently unsheathed. While Gavroche was scrutinizing the shop window and the cakes of Windsor soap, two children of unequal stature, very neatly dressed and still smaller than himself, one apparently 7 years of age, the other 5, timidly turned the handle and entered the shop, with a request for something or other, alms possibly, in a plaintive murmur which resembled a groan rather than a prayer. They both spoke at once, and their words were unintelligible because sobs broke the voice of the younger, and the teeth of the elder were chattering with cold. The barber wheeled round with a furious look, and without abandoning his razor, thrust back the elder with his left hand, and the younger with his knee, and slammed his door, saying, "The idea of coming in and freezing everybody for nothing!" The two children resumed their march in tears. In the meantime, a cloud had risen, it had begun to rain. Little Gavroche ran after them and accosted them. "What's the matter with you, brats?" "We don't know where we are to sleep," replied the elder. "Is that all?" said Gavroche. "A great matter, truly. The idea of bawling about that! They must be greenies." and adopting, in addition to his superiority, which was rather bantering, an accent of tender authority and gentle patronage. "Come along with me, young 'uns." "Yes, sir," said the elder. And the two children followed him as they would have followed an archbishop. They had stopped crying. Gavroche led them up the Rue Saint Antoine in the direction of the Bastille. As Gavroche walked along, he cast an indignant backward glance at the barber's shop. "That fellow has no heart, the whiting," he muttered. "He's an Englishman." A woman who caught sight of these three marching in a file, with Gavroche at their head, burst into noisy laughter. This laugh was wanting in respect towards the group. "Good day, Mamselle Omnibus," said Gavroche to her. An instant later, the wig maker occurred to his mind once more, and he added:— "I am making a mistake in the beast. He's not a whiting, he's a serpent. Barber, I'll go and fetch a locksmith, and I'll have a bell hung to your tail." This wig maker had rendered him aggressive. As he strode over a gutter, he apostrophized a bearded portress who was worthy to meet Faust on the Brocken, and who had a broom in her hand. "Madam," said he, "so you are going out with your horse?" And thereupon he spattered the polished boots of a pedestrian. "You scamp!" shouted the furious pedestrian. Gavroche elevated his nose above his shawl. "Is monsieur complaining?" "Of you!" ejaculated the man. "The office is closed," said Gavroche. "I do not receive any more complaints." In the meanwhile, as he went on up the street, he perceived a beggar girl, 13 or 14 years old, and clad in so short a gown that her knees were visible, lying thoroughly chilled under a porte cochère. The little girl was getting to be too old for such a thing. Growth does play these tricks. The petticoat becomes short at the moment when nudity becomes indecent. "Poor girl," said Gavroche, "she hasn't even trousers. Hold on, take this." And unwinding all the comfortable woollen which he had around his neck, he flung it on the thin and purple shoulders of the beggar girl, where the scarf became a shawl once more. The child stared at him in astonishment, and received the shawl in silence. When a certain stage of distress has been reached in his misery, the poor man no longer groans over evil, no longer returns thanks for good. That done, "Brrr," said Gavroche, who was shivering more than Saint Martin, for the latter retained one half of his cloak. At this "brrr," the downpour of rain, redoubled in its spite, became furious. The wicked skies punish good deeds. "Ah, come now!" exclaimed Gavroche. "What's the meaning of this? It's re-raining. Good heavens! If it goes on like this, I shall stop my subscription." And he set out on the march once more. "It's all right," he resumed, casting a glance at the beggar girl, as she coiled up under the shawl. "She's got a famous peel." And looking up the clouds, he exclaimed, "Caught!" The two children followed close on his heels. As they were passing one of these heavy grated lattices, which indicate a baker's shop, for bread is put behind bars like gold, Gavroche turned round. "Ah, by the way, brats, have we dined?" "Monsieur," replied the elder, "we have had nothing to eat since this morning." "So you have neither father nor mother?" resumed Gavroche majestically. "Excuse us, sir, we have a papa and a mamma, but we don't know where they are." "Sometimes that's better than knowing where they are," said Gavroche, who was a thinker. "We have been wandering about these 2 hours," continued the elder. "We have hunted for things at the corners of the street, but we have found nothing." "I know," ejaculated Gavroche. "It's the dogs who eat everything." He went on after a pause. "Ah, we have lost our authors. We don't know what we have done with them. This should not be, gamins. It's stupid to let old people stray off like that. Come now, we must have a snooze all the same." However, he asked them no questions. What was more simple than that they should have no dwelling place? The elder of the two children, who had almost entirely